Hi, I'm Steve King, pastor of New Life Church here in Prince George County, Virginia, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our service today. And I especially want to welcome those of you that are watching this video or listening to the audio, because this message is especially geared for you today. Certainly it's for those folks that are in the room as well, but in particular, I'd like to again focus on those of you that are watching or listening today. We are in a series called Christian, It's Not What You Think. Last week we were in part 2, and I sort of like to continue part 2 today before we get into part 3, which will be next week, and sort of dig a little deeper into some of the things that we've already been talking about. Just sort of as a quick review, we're focusing on this word Christian because it's such a confusing term. You see, you can believe just about anything that you want to believe and still call yourself a Christian. And the reason why it's such a confusing term, and the reason why you can hide behind this word all day long and you can believe just about anything you want to believe and call yourself a Christian, is because this term is not clearly defined in the Scriptures. It's only used 3 times in the Bible, and it was a term that was used by the populace or the non-Jesus followers to describe the Jesus followers. Followers of Jesus never really used this term to describe themselves, and Jesus didn't use this term to describe his followers. However, there is a term in the Bible that's used by Jesus to describe his followers, and it was also the term that followers used to describe themselves. And it's a terrifying term because it is so clearly defined. And that word is disciple. Disciple. So, what's a disciple? If the word Christian is confusing, what does the word disciple mean? Well, to be put it pretty clearly and pretty simply, a disciple is a learner or a pupil, an apprentice, an adherent, or you could use the term follower to describe a disciple. And that's the term that I'd really like to focus in and sort of dig a little deeper on today, that term follower. We're going to be continuing this verse of Scripture that was found in John chapter 13, verse 34. This is where Jesus was meeting with his disciples just shortly before he was arrested and then crucified, and then on the 3rd day rose again. And the verse that we would like to look at is this one right here. He says, "A new command I give you, love one another." And again, that wasn't such a new revelation. They'd heard Jesus talk about love before, but he sort of frames it in a new way, because he continues on here where he says, "I want you to love others as I have loved you." And we talked a little bit last week and week number 1 about how Jesus loved people. He says, "As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Boy, that kind of puts it in a whole new framework as you begin to examine how Jesus loved. And Jesus says this is so important that it's sort of going to become the linchpin, if you will, of being a follower of his. Because the verse continues here in the Gospel of John. He says, "By this one thing, by this everyone will know that you are my," and he didn't use the term Christian, but he used that real terrifying term. He used the word disciple. "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples." And what is that one thing? If you love one another. Wow. That's challenging, isn't it? Because if we're honest with ourselves, there are just some people that are easier to love than others. Can I get an amen on that? Yeah, okay. Some people are just easier to love than others. There's some people that are real easy to love. But let's be honest, there's some people it's not very easy to love them. And in fact, if we're really honest, there's just some people that we have no desire to love, either because of what they've done to us personally, or how they behave, or whatever list of criteria as to why they're on the bad list. There are those people that deep down we just don't really have the desire to love. But as we looked at last week, Jesus told us that because God loves us, so we ought. We said that meant to owe. So we owe it to others to love them, even if we don't feel like loving them. Because God loved us, because Jesus loved us, we owe it to others to love them. But some people are easier to love than others. And today I thought we would look at one of those kind of unlovable people that Jesus called to be part of his group. And we find this story in the book of Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. And it's about a man called Matthew. And it says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. The reason Matthew was sitting at the tax collector's booth is because Matthew was a tax collector. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were with Jesus already at this point when he approaches this man called Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. But you could just as easily change this phrase right here from Matthew, a tax collector, to Matthew, a traitor. Matthew, a thief. Matthew, a robber. You see, tax collectors were probably considered the lowest of the low. They were the scum of the earth. And tax collectors, and probably particularly Matthew, he was considered a traitor because he was a Jew collecting taxes for Rome. And many times not only did he collect enough for the government, but he collected enough for himself as well. And that's why he was considered a thief and a robber, because of the way that he took advantage of his own people, the Jewish people. And so he was very much hated. Tax collectors had their own category. There were sinners, and then there were tax collectors. And we're going to see that in just a few moments in another verse that's coming up. But he was the worst of the worst. And it was probably very personal with the disciples, because they probably had been gypped by him anyway, by Matthew. And so they've probably had an encounter with Matthew before this day. But as they approach Matthew, Jesus walks up to him, and the disciples are probably thinking to themselves, all right, he's going to let him have it now. And what did he say to Matthew? Well, I'll tell you what he didn't say. He didn't say, you should be ashamed of yourself. How could you do this to your own people? How could you rob and steal from your fellow Jews? I bet your mama is really proud of the kind of man that you have become. No, that's not what Jesus said to him. This is what he did say to Matthew. He said, follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Now, in this account in Matthew, it maybe even seem a little unrealistic that somebody would just say, follow me, and you would get up and follow them. But I dare say, as Matthew has been there sitting at the tax collector's table, he's heard Jesus preach. He's heard Jesus speak to the crowds and to teach. He may have even been there on the shores of the Sea of Galilee when Jesus was speaking to the people, and then he got into the boats of Peter, Andrew, and James and John, the fishermen, and began to speak from the ships there. And so this was probably not his very first encounter with Jesus. And so as he's heard Jesus, as he's experienced some of the teachings of Jesus, and he's seen the crowds that Jesus has started to gather, when Jesus says to follow me, there'd already been some groundwork that had been laid. And so he made the decision to get up from the table and to follow Jesus. Now, for just a moment, I'd like you to put yourself in the disciples' shoes. You see, I don't know how you read the Bible, but when I read the Bible, I try to put myself into the scene, to kind of imagine what the people were feeling and what they were thinking at the time, even though all of it may not be written down in the scriptures. These were just normal, everyday people, just like you and I. And so I can just imagine, probably not literally, but figuratively, when they heard Jesus walk over to Matthew and instead of chastising him said, "Follow me," I can imagine they would have said, "Hey guys, gather around. Group huddle. Did he just do what I think he just did? Did Jesus just say what I think he just said? What could he be thinking? Why would he invite somebody like that? Why would he invite a thief and a robber and a traitor? I mean, he's nothing like us, and we are nothing like him. Why would Jesus do such a thing and try to make him part of our group? Our reputation is at stake. I mean, if Matthew is going to become one of us, then people might think that we're like him. And what's that going to do to our reputation? In fact, they might even think that we condone what Matthew does and how he behaves and the type of person that he is. If we allow him to be part of our group, it could be sort of a guilt by association sort of a thing. What's that going to do to us? How are people going to look at us from this point on? I can just imagine that kind of conversation going on amongst the disciples. There's something else I would like to point out here. When Jesus asked Matthew to follow me, Jesus did not make it conditional. In other words, Jesus didn't say, if you're willing to fill in the blank, you can follow me. Jesus didn't say, if you're willing to stop doing this, then you can follow me. Or if you're willing to start doing this, you can follow me. If you're willing to do this, you can follow me. If you're willing to give up this, you can follow me. Jesus didn't say any of that. He took Matthew right where he was, and he invited Matthew to follow him. He did not make it conditional. Well, if the disciples thought it was bad already, it was getting ready to get worse, because they left that spot, and guess where they went? They went to Matthew's house. Could it get any worse? You see, the scripture tells us that while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, what happened? Many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. I told you a few moments ago that tax collectors were kind of in their own category, and this verse kind of points that out. There were many tax collectors and sinners, and they came and ate with him and his disciples. And again, I kind of read the Bible creatively. I can just kind of imagine all the disciples there that were gathering with Jesus, who he had gathered up to this point, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and they're all sitting there, and they're amongst these sinners and tax collectors, and probably imagining, what's nice guys like us doing in a place like this? I hope Mom doesn't find out where we are, because she would not like to know where we are and where we're having dinner tonight, because she warned us about these kinds of people. And so I can imagine it was just very uncomfortable for the disciples. But it says, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. I'd like to make a couple observations at this point, something that may not be obvious right in the very beginning. But as you begin to read the Gospels and you begin to read about Jesus and his ministry, you will find that Jesus was very comfortable with people who were nothing like him. Jesus was very comfortable with people who were nothing like him. And so this is what I'd like to address to those of you that may call yourself Christians, or you may consider yourself disciples or followers. Are you comfortable with people who are nothing like you? Or do you insist on surrounding yourself with only those people that believe exactly like you do and go to the places that you like to go, and you don't really associate with other kinds of people? Well, Jesus was very comfortable with people who were nothing like him. And on the flip side, people who were nothing like him were very comfortable with Jesus because of Jesus' approach, Jesus' style, Jesus' personality. There was something about him that people who were nothing like Jesus were very comfortable around him. They didn't feel coerced. They felt drawn to Jesus. They may not believe everything that he was saying at this point. They may not even consider themselves a follower of Jesus or a disciple of Jesus at this point. But there was just something about him, in the way that he talked, in the way that he lived his life, that was attractive to people. And people who were nothing like him were very comfortable with Jesus. And so again, those of you that consider yourself a Christian or a follower or a disciple, are people who are nothing like you comfortable being around you? Or do you have people around you who feel coerced, perhaps by the way that you approach sharing your faith with others, that, boy, they just don't feel comfortable around you? I'll just leave it there for you to ponder and for you to consider. But people who were nothing like him were very comfortable with Jesus. This didn't sit too well with the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees. And so I don't know if they were standing outside the house and looking in the windows and seeing Jesus and his disciples, this supposed religious rabbi who was trying to teach people how to live, associating with these kinds of people. And so I don't know if that was the scenario or what, but the scriptures tells us that when the Pharisees saw this, where Jesus and his disciples were and who they were having dinner with, they asked his disciples this question: why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus, I guess, overheard this question because he responded. And this is what Jesus said. On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." Now, Jesus is sitting in the house with Matthew, the other tax collectors, the sinners that were there having dinner, and they could hear what Jesus said. And Jesus says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Wait a minute. Jesus, are you calling me sick? Matthew, you're a traitor. You're a thief. You're a robber. Yeah. You're sick. You need help. You need to make some changes in your life. And you really don't even need me to tell you that, because deep down, you already know that you need help, that there's some things that need to be changed in your life. And perhaps you've tried to change these things on your own and you just haven't been able to do it. But that's why I've come. I've come to help you. I've come so that you can have a new life and be able to put the old things away. And so it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but it's the sick who need the help that only Jesus can give. You see, Jesus was kind of presenting a new paradigm here. This is what the Pharisees believed. The Pharisees believed you need to change and then you can join us. Again, it's conditional. You get your act together and you can then come and be a part of us. You do the right things, say the right things, dress the right way, look the right way, and you can come and be a part of us. That's what the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the day, that was their attitude. That was their belief. But Jesus presented something new. Jesus said, join us and you will change. In other words, come just as you are. You don't have to get your act together first. You don't have to do the right things. Just join us. Come and be a part of us. Follow me, and things will begin to change. And that's the way it is when you become a disciple. As you begin to follow Jesus, as you begin to listen to what Jesus has to say and the things that he was trying to teach us, after a while, things begin to change. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. And it's Jesus that's making the change, and not the person themselves. Pharisee says change and you can join us, but Jesus says join us and you will change. At this point, I'd like to make a special invitation to those of you that are watching this video or listening to this audio. And I would like to invite you not to join a church, but to come and to be a part of this community of disciples, where you can come and you can learn with the rest of us, to be a student among students, myself included. And you can come and be a part of what we do here on Sunday mornings at 10:30, as well as some of the other activities that we may do, which could include Bible studies or social events and that sort of thing. We invite you to come and to be a part of us. Now, I think it's a fair question to ask, well, what is required? And this is what is required. Actually, it may be easier to tell you what is not required. And it's the same thing as following Jesus. The same things that are not required for following Jesus are the same things that are not required for coming and being a part of our community here. Number one, as a Jesus follower, being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. You may be thinking to yourself, well, I'm not good enough. These people don't know my background. They don't know where I've been. They don't know what I've done. And none of that really matters, because being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. In fact, it is a prerequisite to coming and being a disciple and being a Jesus follower. You see, the only types of people that Jesus called to follow him were sinners. Remember what we said a few moments ago? Jesus says it's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. And Jesus came to help you and to me to become more like him. And so being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. It's a that's a hard word to say. Prerequisite. Number two, being an unbeliever does not disqualify you. You may not consider yourself a believer. You may not consider yourself a disciple, or to use the word that we've been talking about, Christian. But if you don't consider yourself a believer or a follower, if you consider yourself an unbeliever, that doesn't disqualify you from coming and joining us on Sunday mornings at 10:30. The fact of the matter is, none of Jesus' earliest followers believed. Even Peter, Andrew, James, John, Matthew, and all the other disciples. In fact, they all abandoned him when he was arrested and crucified. And when Jesus died, they felt like the movement was over. The movement died when Jesus died. In fact, it wasn't until after the resurrection that they really, truly believed that Jesus was exactly who he said he was. So, being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you, because none of the earliest followers of Jesus believed. Number three, the invitation to follow is an invitation to relationship. See, we're not asking you to come and be a part of a church, because that has as many negative connotations these days as the word Christian. So you're probably not looking to become part of a church, but perhaps you'd like to come and be a part of a community who will love you, who will pray for you when you have needs, and will encourage you. That's the kind of people that you'll find here at New Life Church. Maybe that's something that would be appealing to you. If so, we invite you to come and to visit with us one Sunday morning beginning at 10:30. But the invitation to follow is an invitation to relationship. It's not rules and regulations. Jesus often gave examples of what this new life is all about, this relationship. He used the example of father and child. He used the example of a vine and branches and how they're connected with each other. He used the example of a shepherd and sheep and the relationship that they have to kind of help explain the relationship between God and us. It's not rules and regulations. That was the Pharisees. It was relationship. And that's what Jesus was all about. So the invitation to follow is an invitation to relationship. And then finally, following forces me to focus on where I am rather than where you are not. Probably one of the biggest criticisms of church and Christians is this word called judging. The church is so judgmental, and some of the accusations against the church are pretty legitimate. In fact, we're going to talk about that specifically in part 3 of our series on Christian. It's not what you think. So I invite you to either come and be a part here in the room on Sunday morning at 10:30, or to be sure to join us via video or audio for part 3 of our series, because we're going to talk about that whole subject of judging one another and how that's gotten as confusing as the word Christian. So following forces me to focus on where I am, to help me to grow and not be so much focused on where you are or where you are not. So that's my invitation to you, to come and to be a part of this New Life community. We're located at 4906 Prince George Drive in Prince George County. That's Route 156. We meet Sunday mornings at 10:30. Here's a picture of the intersection where we are. This is the corner of Trailing Rock Road and Prince George Drive. Prince George Drive is Route 156, right here at the entrance to the Branchester Lakes subdivision. Here's a picture that's just a little bit closer. District 19 counseling is here on the front end of the building, and then about 3/4 of the way back, you'll find where we meet on Sunday mornings at 10:30, which is New Life Church. If you put it in your GPS, it's 4906 Prince George Drive. There's several ways that you can connect with us. Our website is NLC, which stands for New Life Church, NLCconnection.com, or you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/NLCconnection. And you can also email us at info@NLCconnection. And of course, you can watch our videos on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/NLCconnection. I hope you've been able to sort of get an idea of what it's like here at New Life, sort of our philosophy and how we think about things, how we don't feel like the Pharisees where you need to change before you can come and be a part of us, but we just invite you to come and be a part of us and just watch what God does in your life. There's plenty of opportunities for you to come and to be able to contribute in some way, whether you're an introvert or whether you're an extrovert. There's lots of opportunities for you to be able to get involved with us, and we would love to connect with you. So I hope you'll consider coming and visiting with us one Sunday morning at 10:30, because we would love to meet you and to connect with you.